She stood in the wings of the Theatre des Champs-Élysées watching German officers fill the velvet seats, their uniforms crisp, their laughter loud and confident. They had come to see the famous Josephine Baker, the American sensation who danced in banana skirts and captivated Paris with her exotic beauty and scandalous performances. What they did not know, what they could not imagine, was that pinned inside her silk underwear were photographs of German troop movements, and tucked into her sheet music were names of resistance operatives written in invisible ink. She was 43 years old, a black woman in Nazi-occupied Europe, and she was about to walk onto that stage carrying intelligence that could save thousands of lives. Her name was Josephine Baker, and this is the story of how an entertainer dismissed as frivolous became one of France's most effective intelligence operatives during World War II. By the time you finish listening to this, you'll understand why France gave her a state funeral at the Pantheon in WWII, making her the first black woman to receive that honor, while America barely remembered she existed. You'll discover how the very characteristics that made her vulnerable, her race, her gender, her sexuality, her fame, became the perfect weapons in a secret war where visibility provided the ultimate invisibility. Josephine Baker wasn't supposed to be anyone's idea of a spy. Born Frida Josephine McDonald in 1906 in St. Louis, Missouri, she grew up in poverty so crushing that she slept in cardboard boxes and scavenged for food in trash bins. She was black in an America that relegated people who looked like her to the margins, to the servants' quarters, to the back of everything. She married at 13 to escape her circumstances, divorced at 14, and by 15 was dancing in street corners for coins. Nothing about her early life suggested she would become an international sensation, let alone a decorated military officer who would risk everything to fight fascism. But Josephine had something that couldn't be taught in spy schools or military academies. She had the ability to transform herself completely, to become whatever the moment required, to make people see exactly what she wanted them to see. When she arrived in Paris in 1925 as part of an all-black revue, she understood immediately that Europeans had fantasies about black performers, exotic, primitive, sensual fantasies rooted in colonialism and racism. She could have rejected those stereotypes. Instead, she weaponized them. Her infamous banana skirt routine at the Folies Bergère wasn't just entertainment. It was strategic self-presentation. She gave audiences exactly the savage spectacle they craved, all while exercising complete control over her image, her career, and her wealth. By the time she was 30, she was the highest-paid entertainer in Europe, living in a chateau, owning her own nightclub, and wielding the kind of social access that crossed borders and classes. She dined with ambassadors, danced for royalty, and maintained friendships with military officers, politicians, and aristocrats across the continent. She had built, without realizing it, the perfect intelligence network. When France fell to Nazi Germany in June 1940, Josephine Baker faced a choice that would define the rest of her life. She could have fled to America, used her fame and fortune to sit out the war in safety. She was, after all, an American citizen. The conflict wasn't technically hers to fight, but Paris had given her something St. Louis never could: acceptance, or at least a version of it that allowed her to thrive. France had loved her when America spat on her. The decision wasn't difficult. When Jacques Abti, head of military counterintelligence for the WWII Bureau, approached her about working for the resistance, she didn't hesitate. Her response, according to declassified French intelligence records, was immediate. "France made me what I am. The Parisians gave me everything. I am ready to give them my life." What Abti understood, what made him approach a cabaret performer for intelligence work, was that Josephine Baker had assets no trained spy could replicate. She was internationally famous, which meant she could travel when ordinary citizens couldn't. She was a performer, which meant she had legitimate reasons to interact with German officers and Vichy officials who attended her shows. She was a woman, which meant men underestimated her intelligence. She was black, which meant even those who feared her sexuality never feared her mind. And she was American, which initially made her appear neutral in a European conflict. The Nazis and Vichy collaborators saw exactly what they expected to see: a beautiful, frivolous entertainer whose brain was presumably occupied with costumes and choreography, not military strategy. They were catastrophically wrong. Her first assignments were simple reconnaissance. The WWII Bureau needed information about German officers attending her performances at the Casino de Paris. Who were they? What were their ranks? Who did they associate with? Josephine would perform, dazzle them with her famous smile and provocative movements, then attend after-parties where champagne loosened tongues. She would laugh at their jokes, accept their compliments, and memorize every detail: unit designations, deployments, logistical complaints, strategic concerns. Men in uniform, comfortable in their conquest of Paris, never imagined the woman dancing for them was documenting their movements. But Josephine's role expanded rapidly as French intelligence recognized her unique value. Her fame became operational cover for something far more dangerous. She began traveling throughout Europe and North Africa, ostensibly performing for troops and dignitaries, actually gathering intelligence and serving as a courier for the resistance. This is where her methods became extraordinarily creative and bold. She would attend embassy parties in Lisbon, Rome, and Madrid, neutral cities crawling with spies from every nation, while other operatives had to skulk in shadows and invent cover stories. Josephine walked through the front door in a sequined gown, kissed diplomats on both cheeks, and charmed information out of attachers who competed for her attention. According to her handler's later accounts, she had an almost supernatural ability to make powerful men want to impress her. They would share confidential information, drop hints about troop movements, complain about supply problems, anything to seem important in her eyes. Then came the truly audacious part. How do you smuggle intelligence documents across checkpoints manned by German soldiers and Vichy police? Josephine's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. She hid them in plain sight. Her sheet music became a covert communication system. Using invisible ink made from lemon juice or specialized chemicals provided by French intelligence, operatives would write messages between the musical notes on her arrangements. German border guards would flip through the pages, see musical notation for her cabaret numbers, and wave her through. They never suspected that the spacing between notes, the seemingly random markings, contained details about German defensive positions, Luftwaffe airfields, and Italian troop concentrations in North Africa. But Josephine took even greater risks. According to declassified French military records, she routinely carried photographs and documents pinned inside her underwear. She understood something profound about the intersection of gender, race, and security protocols. German soldiers might search luggage, but they were deeply uncomfortable with the idea of intimately searching a famous black female performer. The cultural taboos around black female sexuality, the very stereotypes she had exploited for entertainment, now protected the intelligence hidden against her skin. Think about the psychological warfare of that choice. She was using their racism and sexism as operational security. They saw her body as simultaneously exotic and untouchable, desirable and threatening. That contradiction, which had been a burden her entire life, became her greatest tactical advantage. She could cross borders carrying intelligence that would have gotten a male operative executed, protected by the very prejudices that had once limited her. In 1941, when the situation in occupied France became too dangerous, Josephine relocated to her chateau, Les Milans, in the Dordogne region of southwestern France. The estate, which she had purchased in 1937, transformed from a symbol of her wealth into resistance headquarters. She sheltered Jewish families fleeing persecution, hid resistance fighters between operations, and hosted clandestine meetings disguised as glamorous parties if Vichy authorities or German patrols questioned the activity. She was simply Josephine Baker, being Josephine Baker, eccentric, extravagant. Surrounding herself with admirers and hangers-on, her celebrity provided cover for an underground railroad. But even Les Milans eventually became too exposed. In late 1940, Josephine and Jacques Apti escaped to North Africa, establishing themselves in Morocco and Algeria, both under Vichy control but with active Free French resistance movements. Here, her intelligence work reached its highest level of sophistication and danger. She performed throughout North Africa, ostensibly entertaining French colonial troops, actually gathering intelligence on Italian naval movements, German supply lines, and the political reliability of Vichy commanders. The intelligence she collected was instrumental in planning Operation Torch, the Allied invasion of North Africa in November 1942. According to military historians, information she gathered about coastal defenses and Vichy troop dispositions helped Allied planners identify landing sites and predict resistance levels. The risk she was taking cannot be overstated. She was a black woman operating in colonial North Africa during wartime, surrounded by Vichy officials who would have gladly handed her to the Gestapo, in a region where racial hierarchies were brutally enforced. If discovered, she faced interrogation, torture, and execution. There would be no prisoner exchange for a cabaret performer, no diplomatic intervention for someone who wasn't even fighting for her country of birth. And still, she continued. When she contracted a near-fatal illness in 1941, likely peritonitis from a miscarriage or gynecological infection, nearly died in a Casablanca hospital. She spent 18 months recovering, much of it in excruciating pain. French intelligence later revealed that, even from a hospital bed, she received resistance contacts, passed messages, and maintained her network. Her hospital room became a dead drop. Visitors bringing flowers and well-wishes were actually couriers delivering intelligence reports. During this period, the Free French forces, recognizing her extraordinary service, commissioned her as a sub-lieutenant in the Women's Auxiliary of the French Air Force. She was given an official military rank for unofficial work that couldn't be acknowledged. The irony was profound. America, the country of her birth, wouldn't allow black women to serve in meaningful military roles, while France decorated her for intelligence operations that helped liberate Europe. After the Allied victory in North Africa, Josephine continued working throughout 1943 and 1944, traveling to the Middle East and entertaining troops while maintaining her intelligence activities. She performed in Egypt, Lebanon, and Syria, always watching, always listening, always gathering information that flowed back to Allied intelligence. Her fame opened doors that remained closed to conventional operatives, and her apparent frivolity made her invisible as a threat. When Paris was liberated in August 1944, Josephine returned in triumph. She performed for Free French forces, participated in victory celebrations, and was finally able to acknowledge openly what she had been doing in secret. The French government awarded her the Croix de Guerre for her wartime service and later the Légion d'honneur, making her one of the most decorated civilians of World War II. General Charles de Gaulle himself praised her courage and effectiveness. But here's what makes Josephine Baker's story particularly poignant. While France celebrated her as a war hero, America barely acknowledged her existence. When she returned to the United States in the early 1950s, she found a country still deeply segregated, still hostile to black performers who demanded equality, still unwilling to recognize her wartime service. The Stork Club in New York refused her service because of her race. Columnist Walter Winchell publicly attacked her. The FBI, under J. Edgar Hoover, investigated her as a potential communist sympathizer, apparently unable to comprehend that someone who fought Nazis might also fight racism. The contrast was devastating. In France, she was Josephine Baker, war hero, Légion d'honneur recipient, friend of presidents. In America, she was just another black woman who needed to remember her place. The country she hadn't fought for honored her. The country she was born in rejected her. So she returned to France and dedicated the rest of her life to fighting different battles. She adopted 12 children of different ethnicities and religions, creating what she called her Rainbow Tribe, a living demonstration of her belief in universal human brotherhood. She became active in the American Civil Rights Movement, participating in the March on Washington in 1963, where she spoke alongside Martin Luther King Jr., wearing her Free French uniform decorated with her military medals. She was the only woman to speak at that historic gathering. She used her fame, her fortune, and a moral authority as a war hero to challenge racism wherever she encountered it. She demanded integrated audiences for her performances, refused to play segregated venues, and spoke openly about the contrast between French acceptance and American bigotry. Her activism was deeply rooted in her wartime experience. She had fought fascism in Europe, and now she fought its cousin, racism, in America and France. But her espionage work remained largely unknown outside French military circles. Intelligence operations are classified for decades, and much of what Josephine did wasn't declassified until the 1990s. By then, she had been dead for over 20 years, having passed away in 1975 from a cerebral hemorrhage just days after a triumphant comeback performance in Paris. She died as she had lived, performing, fighting, refusing to slow down or give up. For decades, her legacy was preserved primarily through her entertainment career. People remembered the banana skirt, the exotic persona, the glamorous image, the intelligence operative who smuggled secrets across Nazi checkpoints, who ran resistance networks from a chateau, who risked execution to gather information for the Allies. That Josephine was forgotten. Until 2021, on November 30th of that year, France inducted Josephine Baker into the Pantheon, the mausoleum where the nation's greatest heroes are honored. She became the first black woman to receive this recognition, joining philosophers, scientists, writers, and political leaders in France's most sacred civic space. President Emmanuel Macron's speech acknowledged not just her artistry, but her courage, her military service, and her lifelong fight for justice. The ceremony was extraordinary in what it represented. Here was a woman who had been poor, black, American, female, every category society used to dismiss and diminish. She had transformed each liability into strength, each stereotype into cover, each limitation into opportunity. She proved that intelligence work isn't just about training or technology, it's about understanding human nature, manipulating perception, and having the courage to operate in plain sight. What made Josephine Baker effective as an intelligence operative was precisely what made her vulnerable as a human being. Her race meant she was underestimated intellectually but highly visible socially. Perfect for a courier who needed to cross borders with legitimate cover. Her gender meant men shared information to impress her, never imagining she would weaponize their confidences. Her sexuality, which had been commodified and controlled throughout her career, became an operational asset when she needed to distract, charm, or disarm. Her fame, which could have made her a target, instead made her untouchable. Who would suspect someone so famous, so visible, of covert operations? Intelligence historians now recognize that Josephine represented an entirely different model of espionage, one that didn't rely on disguise and anonymity but on hypervisibility and strategic self-presentation. She didn't hide, she dazzled, she didn't blend in. She stood out so dramatically that people looked at her surface and never suspected the depths beneath. The documents she smuggled in her underwear, the intelligence hidden in her sheet music, the resistance fighters sheltered in her chateau, these weren't just tactical achievements. They were acts of profound courage by someone who understood she had everything to lose and very little protection if things went wrong. She wasn't a trained soldier. She didn't have diplomatic immunity. She was a performer playing the most dangerous role of her life, with no understudy and no safety net. And she did it because Paris had loved her when St. Louis rejected her, because France had given her opportunities, America denied her, because she understood that fascism threatened the imperfect freedom she had found. Her loyalty wasn't naive or sentimental, it was clear-eyed recognition that for all of France's colonial brutality and racial prejudice, it had still treated her better than the democracy that claimed to value equality. The tragedy is that American intelligence services never fully utilized someone with her unique capabilities and access. Imagine what Josephine Baker could have accomplished working for the OSS, the precursor to the CIA. But American military and intelligence leadership in the 1940s could unconceive of a black woman as a strategic asset. They saw her race and gender as disqualifications, not advantages. France's willingness to use her effectively says something profound about which country actually valued talent over prejudice when survival was at stake. Today, when we study intelligence history, we tend to focus on the traditional spies, the men in trench coats, the defectors, the moles in enemy governments, the signals intelligence and code breaking. Josephine Baker's story challenges that narrow framework. She reminds us that some of the most effective intelligence operatives were the ones who seemed least likely, who operated in plain sight, who transformed their marginalization into tactical advantage. Her legacy extends beyond the intelligence she gathered or the lives she saved. As significant as those were, she demonstrated that courage comes in many forms, that heroism isn't always masculine or military in the conventional sense, that sometimes the greatest act of resistance is simply refusing to accept the limitations others impose on you. France understood this eventually. It took decades, but the Pantheon ceremony represented a nation finally acknowledging the full scope of what she had given. America still hasn't caught up. While there are memorials to her in St. Louis and mentions in civil rights histories, she remains largely unknown to most Americans. The country that produces countless films about white male spies has yet to tell the story of the black woman who smuggled intelligence in her underwear and ran resistance networks from a chateau. Perhaps that's fitting, in a way. Josephine Baker spent her life being underestimated, dismissed as mere entertainment, valued for her body but not her mind. Even in death, even with her documented military service and declassified intelligence files, she is still not fully recognized for what she was, one of the most effective and courageous operatives of World War II. The next time you hear about World War II espionage, remember that while men in London and Washington planned operations, a black woman in a sequined gown was crossing Nazi checkpoints with photographs pinned inside her underwear, hosting resistance meetings disguised as parties and using her fame as a weapon against fascism. Remember that she did this knowing discovery meant torture and execution, knowing her own country wouldn't help her, knowing history might never acknowledge what she sacrificed. Josephine Baker's story isn't just about espionage. It's about a woman who spent her entire life transforming limitations into opportunities, who used the very characteristics that made her vulnerable to make her invaluable, who fought multiple wars against poverty, racism, fascism, and historical erasure, won more of them than she lost. She deserves to be remembered not just for the banana skirt but for the intelligence documents hidden beneath her glamorous costumes, not just for her performances but for the lives she saved when the music stopped and the real work began. France finally gave her the recognition she earned. It's long past time for America to do the same.